Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge. Hi everyone, welcome to the Pilates Lounge podcast. My name's Katie Crane. I am the Pilates professional. Today I've got a very dear friend, and I would consider this person one of my mentors over the year. Carla Mullins is definitely somebody who I've been able to bounce ideas off of, and over the years of knowing each other, I'm sure Carla and I have both learned a lot from each other, but also really shared a deep passion for the profession that is Pilates. Now, Carla Mullins started her career as a solicitor and practiced for nearly 13 years and came to Pilates in 1993. That was like the year that I finished high school because of a complex neurological and health condition. Application and consistency of the method meant that Carla regained her health and was able to move with some grace and, more importantly, without pain through the work of Pilates. In 2002, she decided to set up her own studio in Brisbane. Carla Mullins is co-director and co-owner of Body Organics, a business based in Brisbane, Australia. Body Organics started off as a small Pilates studio in West End in Brisbane, but has now, over the last almost 20 years, grown into one of the leading Pilates studios in Brisbane with 2 studio spaces, and now includes Body Organics Education and, more recently, the Makarlu. As head of Body Organics Education, Carla oversees all the training courses as well as developing new training material. She educates new Pilates teachers as a course provider for the APMA and has delivered APMA diploma in Pilates movement therapy. But APMA is now recognized as PAA, where the APMA and PAA actually married, and now we are known as one industry body, the Pilates Association of Australia. Carla's qualifications are extensive. They include a Bachelor of Rehabilitation Studies with University of Queensland, a Bachelor of Laws, Masters of Social Science and Public Policy, Advanced Diploma of Pilates Movement Therapy, a Diploma of Pilates Movement Therapy, a Diploma of Professional Pilates Practice, and other movement modalities, including Coraline, Gyrotonic, Aston Technique, and Stretch Therapy. So I don't need to tell you guys that Carla Mullins is very well versed in the profession of Pilates. She's very well known both in this country, in Australia, but of course we have listeners in like over 60 countries now on the Pilates Lounge podcast. So I have no doubt that many of you out there have either looked at Carla's work. I know that she is on Pilates Anytime, but probably heard or read of Carla in somewhere that you would be following Pilates. So thank you so much, Carla, for joining us on the show. I'm going to hand the show over to you. I would love for you to actually let our listeners know what it is that we're going to be talking about today. And why have you chosen this topic? Because you came to me with this topic and I love this topic, and I think I agree that it needs to be talked about. And I do have some questions over the show, but will you please let our listeners know, what are we in for today?
Well, we're in for a chat, but it's very exciting to be here. And I'm really here to talk about a new way of trying to help us frame Pilates. And part of it I've come from is that I have studied a lot of movement modalities, but I've also studied a lot at university. And over the years, I started to realize that the way people perceive Pilates as a practice has changed in the last 3 years. In the last 3 decades. And the way that perception has been presented to me, at first, I started to find myself feeling ashamed of calling myself a Pilates practitioner. I felt like I was being gaslit by a whole heap of people saying, well, this isn't really a profession, or this isn't really a modality. And I went, no, this is not right. And it took me a long time to stop and reflect on this and really focus on why did I feel that they were wrong? And what was it about Pilates and the Pilates method that made me so passionate that after 3 decades, I still believe in this and I still want to see this profession continue. And so really what brought me around to it is I stopped and thought about it. I went to university and studied, as you do, and I learnt some things. And it allowed me to understand some of the language that other professions, especially allied health professions, use. And I thought, well, how do I think about what those professions describe themselves as and how they describe their scope of practice or what makes them different from other professions? And really, it took me a long time. I'm a bit slow like this, but I stopped and thought about it and I thought one of the things that I often hear, a model of practice, critical decision making, evidence-based practice, they're all great buzzwords. And sometimes when these words can be used to make you sound more important than you are or to blur what somebody is doing. And so I thought, well, okay, let's stop and think about what is a model of practice, why it's important, then thinking about the framework of practice and then what you call the intervention of practice. So I'm sorry, this sounds really boring, everyone. I promise to try and make it more interesting and give you a context, okay? So I started with an understanding of, I think all of us have heard the word critical decision making. This is how you make a decision. This is how you make sure your work is evidence-based and you're doing the right thing for your clients. And for me to even think about what that decision-making model was, I started to look at how people were describing this. And I appreciated that what was happening was models or the way these clinical decisions were being made were coming from other professions. They were being imposed on the way on the Pilates method practitioners. They weren't necessarily drawn from the profession. So basically I thought, you know what? We have to maybe start as a profession and think from the bottom up. What is it that makes us, or the way we approach a problem, the way we approach a client, different from other professions? And how does that inform our clinical decision making? And that's what a model of practice is. Does that make sense for you?
It does, because we've spoken about this, and I think we've probably been having these conversations for a long, long time anyway, especially because we're both involved in teacher training. And so we see new teachers coming through and we see a lot of these kind of questions being asked. I mean, so can you explain, like, for example, one big thing that we hear all the time is, is the evidence-based practice, so, and I wonder if people's understanding of what evidence-based practice is or what they should be looking for may be a little bit skewed anyway. In my mind, evidence-based practice doesn't mean that it has to be a piece of paper written by a physiotherapist and put in the journal. That isn't, evidence-based practice is a much wider scope of that. So how might that apply to us?
Okay, so evidence-based practice is how we apply our decision-making. A model of practice isn't evidence-based. It is not it does not require to be evidence-based. And I'll use the word lens. So the lens is how we as a practitioner see things happening. And that lens informs the information that we gather and the approach that we use in our practice. And it is the practice that requires a concept of evidence-based. And I'll talk about that in a second. So let's start, first of all, before we even get to this idea of evidence-based, what is a Pilates method practitioner's lens? And that lens or model of practice is what I'm talking about today. So you'll hear physiotherapists bring to the the table the biopsychosocial model. You hear that used all the time. And it's a model that informs how a physiotherapist and many other psychologists and other professions see their client, and they go, well, we will gather information about this person on the basis of who they are, what they do, how they see the world. And from that model, they then collect information and assess it. So a physiotherapist will get this information and they'll go, okay, so the physical or the biological methods that we're looking at here is, what is this person's range of movement? What is this person's understanding or educational levels? And all of that will impact on how they collect information that then says this is what evidence-based protocols that we will use. Now, as a Pilates practitioner, that's one thing that I look at, but I want to understand the person, but I'm also looking at the person and what they're physically wanting to achieve in their day-to-day life. That's their activities, because most people come to see a Pilates movement practitioner from a perspective of, well, this is who I am. These are what's happening to my body, whether it be I've got a shoulder injury or a hip injury, but this is affecting my function because I can't pick up my grandchildren or I can't go swimming or doing these activities. And I, as a practitioner, are going to find out that information about the person and this information about their activity. And the way I'm looking at it is, what movement do they do? Well, how is this impacting on how they move? And so I might look at the way that shoulder is moving and then go, oh, yes, that has a relationship to the opposite hip. This has a relationship to the way that they're moving their neck. All of that movement is the information or the way I look at that person in front of me. And it is that informs the information then that I start to gather as part of my clinical decision making. Does that make sense so far? Now, gather this information, or once I've seen this, how I use this information and what assessment tools I might use might depend on what is evidence-based practice. That is when that word comes into play. But what is evidence-based practice is not just about what is a scientific study. Evidence-based practice is often confused with a science-based approach. I often hear people saying, oh, this is a science-informed Pilates practice. Well, yes, it could be. You could be using a scientific paper, but really the standard that we're all looking at is evidence-based. And I'm sorry, I know this sounds very circular, but let's break it down. Evidence-based has 4 components. One is scientific evidence. The second is the experience of the practitioner. So understanding in that concept of the experience of the practitioner, someone like you and I, Katie, who have been practicing for decades, our experience will be very different, and what we understand and what we bring to the evidence understanding of what a client wants is very different to someone who has done a weekend course and just recently graduated. So that level of knowledge and experience is part of evidence-based. The other 2 components include the context of the practice. Now, this is important. And then the final one is goals of the patient or the client. What do they want? What are their needs and outcomes? And I think I want to go back to the context, and I feel like that's an important part of not only evidence-based practice, but also how we see this model of practice to help define what is a Pilates method practitioner, okay? So the context is, well, if I'm going to a place just after I've had a stroke, that is an acute rehab stage. But if I'm going to a place 15 years after I've had a stroke, you would call that you could be called it a gym, because somebody might not have any consequences post-gym. But a lot of the clients that I see maybe 10 or 15 years later after their stroke might still have a lot of other things going on that they're wanting to deal with. And so the way I sort of define the context when you're talking about the term Pilates is I break it down into 3 scenarios. There is what I would call your acute rehab stage. Now, then I would call there's a fitness stage, which has nothing to do with rehabilitation. And then I call a Pilates method practitioner stage. And I'll be honest, I'm talking about myself as a Pilates method practitioner, and the way I perceive this model is as a Pilates method practitioner. I see you're at acute rehab stage is very often what you'll see physiotherapists and allied health practitioners at that particular period of time. But when you talk about that, it is a time-limited period. Acute. It is normally linked to a specific injury or stage of illness, and that is the focus of the intervention or information gathering and what that practitioner will do with that client. It is often defined by insurance requirements. So like if you're seeing your physiotherapist or exercise physiologist after you've had a hip replacement, there will be very often a series of protocols, and the insurance will say, we will cover you for 3 months or 6 months post-stage, and that it is only about the hip replacement, and you'll use certain codes. And it is about returning the person to the state they were in before they were injured. And that's what rehabilitation is. Whilst a Pilates method practitioner, their context is that a person's coming to them, I've had a hip replacement, but because of the hip replacement, now that I've had that done, I'm finding that my back's still really in pain, and that my knee's not quite right, and that my wrist is still sore from all of that walking on crutches and things like that. And so a Pilates method practitioner will often be looking at all of those factors and going, well, I understand that your years of movement with a dodgy hip have had all of these consequences on the rest of the body. And because my lens is about movement, and I'm not linked to an insurance-based model of saying you have to look at the hip, I, as a movement practitioner, can work with the whole of the body and looking at how the whole of the body moves and how that whole of the body wants to move to achieve the goals of this person. And that is part of what makes evidence-based practice so important, but it is more than reading a scientific research paper. And it's also how you then work with a client at using this evidence-based concept while using a Pilates method model allows you to go, okay, I'm collecting this information and I'm going to make assessment of this information on the basis of how I see this client. I'm not just saying, oh, the person's had a hip replacement, this is the protocol for the hip replacement. Yes, of course I'm going to take that into account, but I'm also going to be collecting all of this information about the client's goals. What is it that they want to achieve now that they've had that hip replaced? Maybe their goal now is about walking the Camino or walking Patagonia because they haven't been able to do this for so many years. So I would then be working with them on how do I help them achieve that goal through better walking practices, better gait, building their back strength, building their endurance. And that is how I, as a Pilates method practitioner, would be gathering the information to develop their program. And that program is a progressive program, because the other part of what makes it a Pilates practitioner is it's not a time-based thing. Clients come and go, yes, but we're not linked to a protocol that by this stage, this person should be able to walk 55 steps or do a squat for 30 minutes without having whatever those random measures are. A Pilates movement practitioner works as a continuum with a client. This is my movement goal, they'll tell me. And all of a sudden, as they're starting to achieve that movement and they're feeling better about it, that movement goal evolves. It's not a movement goal. It's not a goal that I want my shoulder fixed. It is a goal that I want to be able to move my whole body and move my arm and leg in a functional and pain-free way, and that I can do whatever I want because movement is essential to my health. Rant over. But yeah, that's why I feel we need to be finding ways to better define ourselves so that people can actually understand that there is a halfway point between this acute rehab clinical experience and fitness. And some people, don't get me wrong, fitness is important. And many fitness practitioners do use reformers and other sorts of apparatus, but it's not from a Pilates movement practitioner lens. A fitness lens is from exercise, and exercise has a very defined, structured term, and it is different to movement.
And so do you think if we really considered, like you say, like a practice model for the Pilates profession, would then the model then be broken down into, say, these three umbrellas, and then I could say, I'm a Pilates method practitioner, or I'm a Pilates fitness instructor, or just a quick little interruption to say a big thank you to listening to the Pilates Lounge podcast. This podcast is all about sharing our love of movement and Pilates with as many people as possible. So if you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to review us so that we can get the word out there. Also, if you haven't joined us on the Pilates Muse newsletter, it's a bi-weekly newsletter that shares a whole load of information with you. And we also have virtual online education programs. So if you're looking to get inspired and grow even more as a Pilates professional, check us out, www.thepilatesprofessional.com.au. Back to the show.
Well, I'm thinking that really we're talking about two things here. There's a model and then there's a context. And I feel like for the allied health practitioners, they have their own model and their own context of that. And that even if they're an allied health practitioner, practicing the Pilates method, that is a different thing. And that they're either working as an allied health practitioner within that model, or they're working as a Pilates method practitioner who just happens to have an allied health or rehab degree, but they're still working within the context and with the lens of a movement practitioner. And then there's fitness practitioners, and they might have a whole different model because the way they approach it is going to be very, very different, because it's not assessing your movement goals. It's about assessing your fitness goals, which are about cardiovascular endurance and strength. There are very defined things that you look at when you're looking in fitness. And I think it's finding that point. And it really came home to me whilst I was studying, and I was doing a placement in hospital. And I was working with patients who had had all sorts of brain injuries. And I was working with physiotherapists, I was working with occupational therapists, and, I was there as an occupational therapy student, and I was working with a patient, and I could see that the way I saw this client and the way I was helping that client wasn't like the OT or the physio or the exercise physiologist or the speech therapist. I thought, oh dear, Carla, you've just studied all of these years and you've realised that first and foremost, you're a Pilates method practitioner. And the example for this particular patient was the OTs were to look at the upper body, so we all looked to look at the arm, and the physios were looking at the legs, and everyone had their body part that they were looking at. And this patient that I was working with, I realised that for me to help this arm, I had to actually help cue him to stabilise and work through that the functioning leg that wasn't affected by his stroke. And I was able to cue him through that to help stabilise his arms. And I had a physio and an OT all looking at me going, what are you doing? And then they all looked at me and going, oh my gosh, but you've just gotten in 2 weeks an extra 45-degree range in his arm that no one else could, and he's got a better movement in that leg. And it really came home to me that that was what made it different. That's what made me a Pilates movement practitioner, because I didn't confine myself to a body part. I saw the client as a whole. And it's what made me it was the best moment in my profession, in my career, because I just went, yeah, I now can really feel, I understand now what makes this a profession different from all of these things. And this is why we have to have a scope of practice that says, well, this is what we do. It's great if you want to do what we do, but you're going to have to comply with our rules. This is not physiotherapy on a spring. And if you want to claim insurance models, that's fine, but then you're going to have to limit yourself and make sure you only code for that, and then let your clients decide if that's the outcome they want. But we are a profession that has a very distinct way of working. And yes, we have all sorts of divisions in our profession. But let's see if we can find a way of saying it. Let's say this is what we do, and this is how we perceive what we do, that then informs how we practice. And our concepts of breath and alignment and control, they're all important, but they're not our model of practice. They inform how we intervene and how we work with the client. So I'm saying that you have to have almost 3 levels. You have a model of practice that's an overarching, almost like an umbrella. You have a framework of practice, which is how you collect the information, how you make the decisions, what is evidence-based. And then underneath that, you actually have your interventions and the way you work. And with a Pilates method practitioner, that means all apparatus, all concepts of apparatus, not just a reformer, not just a mat, but the understanding of seeing how the Pilates method is a system that works across a variety of apparatus, including the mat, and that apparatus, what it brings to the picture is how it supports the client in their relationship to gravity, in their relationship to alignment, and their relationship to control. That is what the apparatus, and that's what the system of Pilates method does. But you can't get there unless you know your overarching framework or an overarching model.
I feel like obviously you've really benefited from having that first-hand experience, seeing how allied practice works, because I've spent my whole life, as a movement educator. I don't know any other way to look at the body but as a whole. It doesn't make sense for me to look at the body like just your shoulder. And so when I don't even understand how to start to have that conversation. Like, it's like, when I'm speaking to an allied therapist, we actually see the body completely differently. But then I also don't quite know how to explain what it is that I do,
and that's what a model, and that's what a model of practice does. So, for example, so it says, look, yes, I see the body differently, but how I even approach it is different.
Totally
the elements are different. And look, I've worked with physiotherapists and occupational therapists and exercise physiologists and osteopaths in my own practice. I've employed them. And in working with them, I could see that there was something different in the way they approached things.
Mm.
And and I went, okay. And I had started studying physiotherapy years ago in 2004 or whatever. And I knew then that wasn't really for me. So I did my did a fair bit of study, and then I went, oh no, this isn't for me. But I didn't have the concept of a model at that point. I heard people talk to me about the biopsychosocial model, but I didn't really understand that what that translated. I'll be honest, I just didn't. And, I smiled and nodded. I go, okay, well, I'll use that model because someone's told me that's how we were doing it. And then I went, And it's taken me a very long time and observing this. And this incident I'm explaining in the hospital system, this wasn't the first time that I had that approach. I mean, I remember being in an exam, getting in trouble because we were in a Viva exam and we were talking about a client who had balance issues and she had osteoporosis and all sorts of things. And this was my model that I had to work with. And I'm like going, well, we'd have to look at, how her feet and work with about the gait and things like that. And they go, no. Podiatrists deal with the feet, physiotherapists deal with the gait, and you will deal with the eyes. And I'm like going, so I need 3 people to work with one person. How do you bring all of those elements together? And I felt like, that was again, it really did my head in because I realized that's not how I saw the world. And it made me stop and come back to probably an important element that is, how I see the world. And that was that, I started studying law at the age of 16, which is ridiculous, but it impacted on the way I perceived the world. I know that. I know how it structures. And one of the things that happens when you've studied law is that, yes, you learn a body of knowledge, but what you learn is that every lawyer wants to fight the system. Our job is to question the very underlying system that is the basis of our work. Whilst I don't think allied health or any of the health practitioners, your job is not to question the system. Your job is to work within that system to follow very specific protocols. And this is not a criticism of the profession. Don't get me wrong. I think there is a really important role in what physiotherapists, occupational therapists, podiatrists, all of our ists do. They have a really important role, but the underlying nature of their training is not to question their training. It is not to question the system or the way they think of the world and structure. A true Pilates method practitioner is always questioning what we're doing. And it makes it very hard for us as a profession because it means we all have a slightly different view. But our goal or the way we approach it is to say, no, we need to change this system because we need to change the system to respond to the client in front of us. It's not about making the system apply to the client. And I think that is an important element of this idea of the Pilates method practitioner and the Pilates method practitioner model. And all I had done in this article has tried to start a conversation. I am not saying that I have the solution, and I have not said that this is the way this should be. What I've said is, look, if you don't even know what a model is or don't even understand this, here's an idea of what it is. Let's start discussing and thinking about this as the way of defining who we are and what is what we do and what makes us different from an acute rehab specialist and what makes us different from a fitness practitioner, because there's a lot of commonalities between those 3 contexts. And that's great. And let's not, instead of getting caught up in I like to say that probably in everything we do, there's probably about 80% of commonality and there's about 20% of differences. And let's stop getting caught up in being frightened of the difference. Let's have fun with it. Let's own that difference and say, this is what this person needs. And let's respect that this is what this group does and allow them to do that. Don't keep taking from another profession or another modality and saying, because of what we do elsewhere, we can just do this as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that sound a bit naughty?
No, not at all. And I mean, I completely agree. Like, we have an amazing community of allied therapists that we refer to all the time. I love our community of allied therapists. And I think ultimately, once we build relationships with them and have an appreciation of each other, that's really where the magic happens for the client. It's not a them and us argument. I guess it's as practitioners really being able to step into our strengths, and our strengths are looking at the body as a whole.
And at movement as a whole, not as thing. I had a lovely client about 3 months ago. She's gone through breast cancer. You could see there were changes in the breast post lymph node. You could see that I was seeing changes in her shoulder. And I said, well, have you spoken to the doctor? And he said, oh, yeah. He said, not to worry, just because the breast tissue was getting harder and it seemed to be changing color. And I'm like going, you know what? I think you should worry. And so I went and did some research and found a couple of different, and I wrote to an OT that I knew who specialized in lymphedema, and she wasn't close by, but we found her a great OT lymphedema specialist. And she's started seeing that and I can see a difference in what's happening. And she goes, Carla, so thank you so much. This is making a difference. And I said, and I will contact that OT and talk to her about what is it that she feels like I should be doing from a movement diaphragmatic perspective to support this client in my context and in my relationship with this client of why she comes to see me. She goes and sees that OT and she does manual movement therapy and she's given her specialist garments. And between us all three of us, this client, because she's motivated, the OT lymphedema specialist, and through my work as a Pilates movement practitioner, we can get a great client outcome, a better client outcome than if we're all sitting in our little worlds going, oh, I know everything, and not recognizing everybody's specific skill set and understanding of what scope of practice each of us has. Often I hear the word scope of practice to say, well, you can't do that. That's not in your scope of practice. And sometimes I want to turn around and go, well, you can't do that because that's not in your scope of practice. So step back, little boy or little girl or whoever you are, but step back because you need to recognize what I do. And I can't do that until I say to them, this is what our model of how we have that lens. And that's why I'm passionate about finding, because I think together we are all stronger and better and our clients are better. We just have to learn to respect everybody's role.
Can I ask, Carla, is this a topic that you have brought up with the Pilates Association?
I've discussed it briefly with them. And everyone's like looking at me going, and so I actually went away and wrote this article that the Pilates Journal is going to share as part of that process. Because if you've not understood or you don't see this idea of a model, it seems like, oh, wow, this is kind of really esoteric. And how does this relate to me? And I'm going, well, it does relate to us. And let's start thinking, let's pick up some of this language and let's start thinking about this as a bigger picture, our bigger umbrella idea of what is our model of practice, and then use that as a way of helping it to build it down. Because at the moment, I feel one of my biggest fears in Pilates is I just keep hearing arguments that sound so circular. They sound so circular. Oh, I studied with this person, so therefore I am better than this person and I've done this and whatever. We're going, no. Let's get away from the personality stuff and let's get clear about what did we all learn from our various practices? What did we learn? What was the essence of what we were taught when we were doing all of those observation hours, all of that supervised practice hours that made us a movement practitioner, a Pilates movement practitioner? We were learning skills. Yes, we're acquiring knowledge, but we were learning skills of observation of the human body and dynamic movement assessment. And all of that informs how we who've gone through that discipline, I'm sorry, I hate saying we and them. It's not meant to be that, but what makes that a discipline, those skills were acquired for a very specific body and training and support. So that actually also is part of what we need to be doing as how we argue why a Pilates movement practitioner has to follow these training ideas of observation, movement, learning all of that as part of their development of clinical decision making. So this idea of a model is also informing how we approach the training and education of a Pilates movement practitioner, and helps us define that as different to somebody who has done a weekend course with no observation skills, no supervised teaching. They haven't acquired the skills through that type of training necessary for them to deliver the model of Pilates movement practice.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly what I was about to ask next is, then does, the model, the umbrella of the model then, supports the framework of the teacher training that people receives, so then we all have a very clear understanding of when you've done that teacher training, whatever it ends up getting called, then we know that this is your outcomes. This is your expected outcomes. So then you know that you can be confident in working with that, because at the moment, even really like the expected instructor outcomes to me as I teach a certificate in reformer fitness, and I specifically chose just to focus on reformer because I don't want that. This is us. I don't want that. I want us to be able to come together and recognize that reformer definitely has its place within our profession. But when I put the course together and then I submitted it for recognition, it took me 2 years to get it there. And then I was told, this has amazing content, but I don't really know what I'm comparing that to. I'm only comparing it to what my expectations of a course would be, Yeah.
I get you. Like, I'm the same. my students go, oh my God, am I starting to become a physiotherapist or whatever? I'm going, no, you're not, but you are. I need you as this skill level to have an understanding of functional anatomy. I need you to understand what you're seeing physically, to understand how that impacts on a person's activity and task analysis, and then how you do this. And so I looked at the reformer stuff, and yes, I do teach people some reformer fitness work, but it's not my skill set as a teacher trainer. And I have taught, in my challenge of myself, I went and worked in a reformer fitness studio, even while I was working in my own studio, because I actually wanted to understand what is reformer fitness and how is that different from Pilates method practice. And done well, reformer classes can be good Pilates method practice if it's structured in a way in which clients are progressed appropriately, where clients are modified. All of that is possible, but the teacher has to be given the skills and the understanding of what it is to work in a certain way. What is the lens of a Pilates movement practitioner? And the way they deliver that, whether it be on a reformer, wonder chair, Cadillac, whatever, is their choice of intervention.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people, I would say, who are teaching reformer fitness, and it is not from the lens of a Pilates method practitioner. I call it CrossFit on springs, and that's not a thing against CrossFit, but if you think about it, there's a mentality, a way of seeing and working with clients that is a CrossFit practitioner. There's a way of seeing and working with a client that is an Iyengar yoga practitioner, and that is different from a Hatha yoga. It is different from an Ashtanga yoga practitioner. They each have their own approach and model. And I'm just saying, as a Pilates method practitioner, I want to have it clearer. What is it that makes it? What is it as a way we see how we gather our information and how we work with clients that makes us different in our context of working with clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree that, we need to start this conversation, which is why we're here today. But also, I know that the Pilates Journal is a very popular journal, so I'm sure that that's going to reach a lot of people as well. But even, in our studio, we have two different services. So we have what we call the clinic, and then we have what we call the fitness. So the fitness is reformer, clinic is all of the equipment. And what I see now that I have been focusing on the teacher training of reformer, even though my background is very, much holistic and clinical, is that I always say to our instructor students, they're with us for 6 months, and so we have to get through a certain amount of repertoire. But I say to them, you're not actually going to understand this repertoire in your body for another 2 years. So when you work with customers in a reformer class, you don't need to be teaching this intermediate repertoire in the first 6 months. You might start to play with concepts of the intermediate repertoire, but assume that they are with you for 2 years, coming 2 to 3 times a week before they actually have those light bulb moments in their body to understand what it is that they're doing, which is exactly what we see in a clinical or in we just call it clinic just to differentiate the two, because people do have such a lack of understanding of what Pilates is. But, in a boutique Pilates setup, I also assume that those clients are with us for 2 years for them to really not only reach their goals, but have a good understanding about what it is that they're experiencing.
Yeah. And that's absolutely right. I mean, and that's, as I said, Pilates is a continuum.
Mm.
We're seeing ourselves constantly progressing. I don't see Pilates as a 35-day challenge or a 2-week challenge or whatever. That's a fitness approach. Pilates assumes that you're going to progress and evolve and develop, and your goals are going to change. It is part of what you do. It's a habitual element of a quality of life. And that's what Joseph Pilates spoke about, is that process. And a good movement practitioner, a Pilates movement practitioner, is on that journey with their client. I mean, we've both been in profession for a very long time, and we can all say that we have clients that we started with 20 years earlier who are still coming.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that just blows my mind and they say to me, they go, it's never boring. I'm doing something different. And they go, I'm off to do this thing and this thing. And my friends are old. And I'm going, what do you mean old? And they go, they're frightened of doing things. They don't want to travel anymore. They don't want to do that. And I'm going, well, what's old? And they're going, well, they'll say something like, well, I'm 85 and that's not old. But my friend Janie is 70 and she's old. And so it's a state of mind, and it's this continuum. So yeah, I'm passionate about this because I don't want to see our profession of Pilates movement practitioners disappear from the offering to clients. Mm-hmm. And for that to continue, those of us who want this to continue as a profession, we're going to have to step up and start getting over at egos about how much I've done this and how good I am. And let's focus on what is it we can do to pass our knowledge down to ensure that the next generation of teachers not only can be as good as us, but they can be better, because they can take our level of knowledge and our level of skills and then build upon this. Mm-hmm. Because we should be improving and evolving and getting better. And that's not just about reading science. That is about us being clear about the skills that we have through dynamic observation, through listening to the client and listening to that client's body, and being able to interpret what they have through movement so that they can transfer that not just through Pilates, but to their day-to-day existence. What they learn in their movement class should be helping them do everything else better. Pilates makes us better.
And so where to from here?
World domination.
Always.
No, sorry. Well, I'd love people to start thinking about, read the article.
Mm-hmm.
We need to, I want to work with our profession. If people are wanting to start thinking about this, let's create a bottom up approach to how we perceive a model of practice. Let's not have a series of other professionals who haven't got our level of training, experience, knowledge give us a model or a definition and say, well, this is your definition. This is where your box where you should be. We should be working from the grassroots up. We should be working with our associations. And yes, we should belong to Pilates associations.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if that's controversial to some people, but yeah, we should be, because we need to be taking ownership of what it is that makes us awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
So
absolutely agree. No, yeah, you just flew the flag for sure, but that's okay. No, I absolutely, like when I was putting my course together, and people would ask about it, and quite often, who's it recognised? Is it government accredited? Is it recognised by AusActive? And I've always stuck to my gun and said, what matters to me is industry. Nothing else matters to me except industry standard, and that we maintain and elevate that. So I really haven't looked at anything else. To me, government accreditation doesn't mean industry standard. So, that I'm super passionate about that. And what I want, and I know what you want, because if we've worked a lot together, is to support the future of our profession. And I feel like we get to a point in our career where that's what matters, and that we will put whatever effort and energy and resources together that we need to make sure that the future of Pilates really stands high, but also that instructors, both new and emerging, are getting the support that they deserve to become, like you say, better than what we are.
Yeah, and I expect a true master of any discipline expects or should expect that their student will exceed them, that they should become a greater master. And I was talking about this with a colleague recently about Pilates as a guild, and the idea of the concept of guilds and apprenticeship. And one of the things I often say to people is, it used to be whether you wanted to become a carpenter or a builder or any, craftsman, and I believe Pilates is a craft, is you would start as an apprentice and you would work with your master and you would reach a certain point with your master. And then your master would say, it is now for you to become a journeyman. And that this apprentice would then go off and they would, let's say it's a builder, they'd go and fix somebody's leaky roof or do all of these little jobs. And then normally around 7 years, I love the fact that it's a 7-year thing, but they would come back to their master and the Guild of Masters and say, I am ready to present my masterwork. That's where the term comes from. And they would be assessed by their peers on the skills and the knowledge of those peers to say that this person is now a master. And as a master, they can then take on the responsibility of training apprentices. And they would be assessed on their masterwork. And they were expecting that they would then receive that standard. And I feel that as a profession, that idea that we do have senior people in our profession who can step up, and their job is not only to continue to produce masterworks, but their job is also to start training their apprentices and to build those people up to take over that profession.
Mm-hmm.
That is truly my vision. It's a very boring vision, but that's what I want for Pilates, because I love what I do, and every day I see somebody whose life is better because of the work of one of the Pilates practitioners I've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
And I want that to continue. You can't replace that, or you shouldn't replace that. progress is about us building on the best things in our profession and owning it.
Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, with your profound insights about our profession and the mastery of becoming a Pilates professional and some ideas around, potentially all of this could happen. What is one thing, if you could step into your future self and have a conversation with yourself many years ago, what would you say? What's some advice that you would have given yourself? And what would you have done
to myself 10
differently
years
or
ago?
better? Whatever, you're old, so whatever.
Yeah.
You're
Oh,
85.
It's only a mistake if you do it twice. And so the wisdom I have now is because of my own doubts and my own need to understand better back then. So I would always say, never stop asking questions and challenging. That is actually what is essential. But also believe in yourself and stop and think about what you were seeing in your clients back then, what people were telling you, and what they kept on coming back and they kept on experiencing. And I would admit, around 10 years ago, I went through a really bad stage with a number of practitioners, allied health practitioners, who, to be honest, I felt like gaslit me. I mean, I let them gaslight me, so it's not, I'm not saying I'm a victim, but I doubted my skills and my knowledge at the same time that they were actually taking my skills and knowledge. And they were like getting everything they could out of me, but at the same time turning around and saying, oh, well, you're not a physiotherapist, so how would you know? And then I would turn around and go, and they would say to me, oh, well, you shouldn't be working with that client with a stroke because you wouldn't know what you're doing. And then the client turns around and says, well, actually, I had this stroke 17 years ago, but she's the first person that's got me to be able to lift my foot, and did that in 6 weeks. Up until then, I've had all of this going on. And so the clients are saying, I actually want to continue working with her. I don't want to work with you as a physiotherapist. But in my head, I was like, oh, well, they're right. I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. And what I realized was, and I'm still learning, I don't think I knew everything back then either. But what made me different was my goal was about the client. And if I didn't know, God, I went and studied. I went and found out more. I went to this course. I did this course. And you'll still see me going to every course under the sun. My list of qualifications is ridiculous. I don't regret going and getting my Bachelor of Rehab Studies. I don't regret that process. But I think the most valuable knowledge I've ever learned is from doing my study as a Pilates practitioner and working with other Pilates practitioners and really working with clients in a present state to learn and understand that. And I feel like really find an awesome Pilates mentor. Find someone that you like working with and learn from them, because that is your profession, Carla. And don't forget your profession. If you want to become something else, that's fine. But if you truly love your profession, and I've gone the full circle, I feel like I have gone through the full circle, and I now love Pilates more than I've ever loved it before because of what I've learned on the journey of questioning it. So to my past self, Carla, you were doing the best you could at that particular point in time. So be proud of where you were. And to future Carla, I hope you're still doing the best you are with the knowledge you had at that particular time, because you'll keep learning. And to all of you who are at the beginning of your journey or in that winter of the soul where you're doubting what you are and you're doubting what you're doing, trust yourself and trust what your clients are saying and find a mentor. Just a mentor doesn't have to be someone who's rich and famous. It can, who's running courses all over the world. It is someone that you can pick the phone up to and go, oh my God, today was shit. It was just awful. And I did this. And someone will say, well, I would have done that. Or have you thought of it this way? And you go, oh, I can reflect on that and use that to learn what to do. It's really all I can say is we're all going to make mistakes. Just be kinder to yourself and be passionate and if you don't have the passion for this work, that's okay. Go and find something different. You don't have to keep doing it if it's making you miserable. But and sometimes it will make you miserable, let's face it. We've all had those. We've all had those. And, go and do a course. Go and find someone if that's the case. But if you don't have the passion for it, get out now, because you're not going to be rich. You're not going to be making millions of dollars. But, oh my goodness, I had a woman today who's had toes amputated because of melanoma. She's had knee replacement. She can't use her arms. And she just looked at me after 6 weeks and she says, I am so thankful for everything that you have done. She goes, 20 years ago, Pilates saved my life and I stopped doing it and it's taken me a long time. But she goes, I'm thankful because now I'm doing things and I'm looking forward to trekking the Himalayas again. I'm like, maybe not next week, but yeah, you can do it. But it made me realize that, yeah, it makes a difference. So you can't really get better than that, can you?
Carla Mullins, Body Organics Education, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I have no doubt that this conversation is going to pique a lot of interest and a lot of curiosity and potentially a lot of conversation, which is what we are hoping for. I couldn't agree more with you as far as finding a mentor, find support, keep learning. And if this is what you're passionate about, know that this is the right place for you, because goodness knows the world needs more of people like Carla Mullins. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name's Katie Crane. I'm the Pilates professional. This is the Pilates Lounge podcast. Stay on the line, Carla. I'll say a quick goodbye to you. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Of course, you'll find all of Carla's details in the show notes. Now, Carla is so good at sharing her wealth of knowledge, her skills, and her passion for Pilates movement with everybody. So look up her details in the show notes. We'll share whatever it is that she wanted to share with us, but you can definitely find her on social media. And she writes really thought-provoking, quirky, and interesting articles. Thanks, Carla. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Katie.